it over there. I'll clean it up later.
So I did hear a couple of remarks from some congregants about the fact that they had a hard time hearing you and understanding you. And not the volume, but the fact because you were wearing either a mask or talking too fast, but especially people in the back. I heard several comments that people during your sermon had a hard time comprehending what you were saying. And some people did ask me, well, how come there's a plexiglass thing here but none over there? I said, well, Rabbi chose to do that. He wanted to. So anyway, just something you want to think about. That I did hear several remarks about people having a hard time getting what you were saying and had a hard time understanding your sermon because of that.
All right, good to know.
Just pass along.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Yes. Can I fix your kippah? Yeah, I can fix your kippah.
Hi there. What's happening? Nothing?
I'd much prefer to wear a mask than to have the screen in between.
Yeah, so anyway, when you give your sermons, you can maybe just slow it down a little bit, try to say it a little bit more so people can better understand you. And so it could have been a combination of the mask, fast talking. Sometimes you tend to trail off sometimes at the end of your sentences.
Sure.
So whatever it is,
I heard from several people who were watching on the live stream that my delivery was perfect and that they could understand every word.
Because you're right in front of the microphone, it picks it right up.
So it's an interesting balance.
Yeah. So again, everybody's got their own. I think the microphone I noticed on the live stream too that when you're talking to the microphone, it's very clear. It's very clear. The live stream is really, really good.
Yeah.
Test.
It works. Well, it's turned on. That's what I was checking. It works.
Ellie. Hmm? Oh, yeah. Shabbat Shalom. Welcome to Congregation Agudat Achim's in-person and live stream Shabbat morning service. This week is Shabbat Shuvah, the Shabbat between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, where we have a particular emphasis in our Haftarah, in our liturgy, in our personal relationships, in our internal Cheshbon HaNefesh, our soul work, on returning, on turning back, returning, homecoming. As you know, we've been beginning our service at 9:15 and have the opportunity to do some different modalities of connecting to our service. Over the last 4 weeks, we've done a deep dive Iyun Tfilah into one psalm. We did a meditative service. We did an exploration with English. And we did an opportunity for connection through song. This morning's service will be a traditional full Psukei de Zimra in the Nusach of Shabbat. An opportunity to read through each psalm and to connect to it. We begin on page 2. Upon entering the sanctuary, Ma tovu ohalecha Yaakov mishkenotecha Yisrael vani berov chastecha avo veitecha Eshtachave el hechal kodshecha ve'yiratecha Adonai ahavti me'on beitecha umekom mishkan kevodecha v'ani eshtachave ve'yechra evrecha lifnei Adonai osi v'ani tefilati lecha Adonai eit ratzon Elohim berov chastecha, Haneini bemet yishecha. We turn to page 10 and we rise for the morning blessings, Birchot HaShachar. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan lasech vivina lafchin ben yom uvein laila. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shesani betzalmo. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam she'asani Yisrael. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam she'asani ben chorin. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam pokeach ivrim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam malbish arumim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam matir asurim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam zokef kefufim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam rokah haaretz al hamayim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam she'asa li kol tzarki. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam hamechin mitzad negaver. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam ozer Yisrael bigvura. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam oter Yisrael b'tifara. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam hanoten l'yaif koach. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam hamavir shneim einayim mami apapai v'yotzamunecha Adonai Eloheinu Uneinu hayom v'chol yom l'cheinu l'chatzim rachamim beinecha v'nei koreinu v'tikumenu chasim tovim. Baruch atah Adonai gamel chasim tovim l'amo Yisrael. You may be seated as we continue on page 12. Yirat zom v'necha Adonai Eloheinu hai v'lo yavotai shetatz. Ashreinu ma tov lokeinu ma na'im goraleinu ma yafa yirshateinu. Ashreinu shenachim ashkimi u'marivim erev v'boker v'omrim pamayim b'chol yom Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai echad. Kadesh et shimcha makdish et shemecha v'kadesh et shimcha b'olamecha v'yishuat chatarim v'tagbiya karneinu Baruch atah Adonai v'kadesh et shimcha b'rabim Atahu Adonai Eloheinu. Notice that the traditional Psukei de Zimra includes study. We're on the bottom of page 14. Pa'am achat haya Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai yotzei miYerushalayim. We turn to page 18, Roman numeral 3. We read together in English. To walk in all God's ways. These are the ways of the Holy One, gracious and compassionate, patient, abounding in kindness and faithfulness, assuring love for 1,000 generations, forgiving iniquity, transgression, and sin, and granting pardon. This means that just as God is gracious and compassionate, you too must be gracious and compassionate. The Lord is faithful in all God's ways and loving in all God's deeds. As the Holy One is faithful, you too must be faithful. As the Holy One is loving, you too must be loving. Yehi ratzon mefanecha Adonai Eloheinu v'levoteinu, shetitein chalkeinu b'toratecha, v'niyamin tamidav shel Aaron HaKohen, ohev shalom v'rodev shalom, ohev et abriot u'mekorban haTorah. We continue on page 32 with the Psalm for Shabbat. Hayom Yom Shabbat Kodesh, shebo hayu elavim omrim v'eit hamikdash, mizmor shir liyom haShabbat. Hod Yunufun Beseva, Desheni Maranani Miu, Lagid Kiasharanai, Tsuri, Velo Avlatabo. Page 50. Mizmor Shir, Chanukadabai David. הפכת מספידים למחולי, פיתחת שקי ותעזרני שמחה, למען יזמרך כבוד ולא ידום, אדוני אלוהי לעולם עודך. We rise for Baruch She'amar, page 54. Baruch She'amar, v'haya ha'olam, Baruch hu, Baruch Oseh v'reishit, Baruch Omer v'yoseh, Baruch Ozer Mekayim, Baruch Merachem al ha'aretz. Yachiv Chai Olamim, Melech Ushbach M'Po'ari Ad Shemo HaGadol, Baruch Atah Adonai, Melech Mulal Batish Bachot. You may be seated as we continue on the bottom of page 54. Hod Adonai Kiru Bishmo, Hod Yavamim Alilotav. Shiru Adonai kol haaretz basmi. Ki gadol Adonai mulal mod v'norahu al kol Elohim. Ki kol Elohei amim elilim. V'Adonai shamayim asa. Hod v'adar lefanav oz v'chedva bimkomo. Hodu Adonai ki tov, ki le'olam chatzov. Romemu Adonai Eloheinu, v'yishtachavu la'adom raglav kadoshu. Romemu Adonai Eloheinu, v'yishtachavu la'arkodsho, ki kadosh Adonai Eloheinu, v'hu racham yichaper avon, v'lo yashchit. Adonai tzvot imanu miskaflanu, Yaakov Sela. Adonai tzvot asher tamodech bach. Adonai Hoshia melech nenu v'yom koreinu. Hoshia tamecha v'recha nachlatecha. V'ani v'chastecha batachti, agel libi b'shuatecha. Ashira l'Adonai, ki gamal alai. We turn to the bottom of page 60. La menatzeach, mizmor l'David. Torat Adonai Tzimimam, Shivat Nafesh, Yihiyu l'ratzonim refi, v'hegyon libi lefanecha, Adonai tzuri v'goli, v'David b'shanato et tamo lifnei Avimelech, v'yagasheu v'yelach, havarcha V'chuvanim shimuli Rabbo Rao Tzadik Mikulam Yatzilenu Adonai Shaber Kol HaKodai Podei Adonai Nefesh Avadav V'lo Yishmu Kol HaChosim Bo. Bottom of page 64. Tefillah LaMoshe Ish Elohim. Mim not Yameinu Ken Hodav V'navi Levav Chochma Ye'ra'el el avadecha fo'olecha v'hadarcha b'neihem v'noam Adonai Eloheinu aleinu ma'aseh yadeinu koden aleinu ma'aseh yadeinu koden ehu Yoshe B'Seter Elyon, B'Tel Shaddai Yitlonan. Yikra'eni ve'enehu imo anochi v'tzara achalatzehu ve'achabdehu orech mimaspiehu ve'arehu bishuati orech mimaspiehu ve'arehu bishuati Hallelujah Halu et Shem Adonai. Beit Yisrael baruch et Adonai, Beit Haron baruch et Adonai, Beit HaLevi baruch et Adonai, Yireh Adonai baruch et Adonai, Baruch Adonai Mitzion, Shochen Yerushalayim, Hallelujah. We rise, page 72. Dum dum di bam ba da di da 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 dum ba da di da 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 dum ba da dum. Ya da di ya da dum ba di da 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 dum ba da di da 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 dum ya da di da da dum ya da 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 ya da ya da 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 ya da da ya da da ya da 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 ya da ya da 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 ya da ya da 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 ya da da ya da da ya da da. Hodu l'Adonai ki tov ki le'olam chasto. Hodu l'Elohei ha'Elohim ki le'olam chasto. Hodu l'Adonai ha'Adonim ki le'olam chasto. Le'oseh niflot gedolot levado ki le'olam chasto. Le'oseh shamayim bidvu na ki le'olam chasto. Le'roka haaretz al ha'mayim ki le'olam chasto. Le'oseh orim gedolim ki le'olam chasto. Et Hashemesh le'memshelet bayom ki le'olam chasto. Et yareach v'chochavim le'memshelot ba'layla ki le'olam chasto. Lemake Mitzrayim bivchoreihem ki le'olam chasto. V'yotze Yisrael mitocham ki le'olam chasto. B'yad chazaka u'bizroa netuya ki le'olam chasto. Lego Jayam Julian Larim, Yolam chasto. Somebody yum bum bum ba ya da di dum bum ya da di da dum bum ba da ba bum yum ba di yum bum bum ba ya da di dum di ya da 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 dum ya da 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 da. Noten lechem lecho basar ki le'olam chasto. Hodu la'el ha'shamayim ki le'olam chasto. You may be seated as we continue on page 74. Ranenu tzadikim Adonai, lai sharim navatila, hodu l'Adonai b'chinor, b'nevo astor zamru lo. Nafshenu chikta l'Adonai, Ezreinu magyenuhu, ki bo yismach libenu, ki b'shem kodsho v'atachnu, Yehi chazach Adonai aleinu, kasher yichalnu lach. Mizmor shir liyom HaShabbat, tov l'Adon Adonai, ozamer l'shimcha yon. Hold you divun b'seifa, d'shenim rananim yu. Hagid ki ashar Adonai, tzuri v'lo avlat habo. Adonai malach, keyu lavesh. Eidotecha nemnu mel, beveitcha nava kodesh, Adonai leorech yamim. Yichvod Adonai l'olam, yismach Adonai b'masav, yishem Adonai m'vorach, me'atav et olam. V'hurach u'michaber avon v'lo yashchit, v'hir ba'alei hashiva po v'lo ya'ir kol chamato. Adonai Oshia, Melech Yanin V'yom Koreinu. Bottom of page 80. Ashrei Yoshevei Techa, Od Yalu Chasela. Tehilat Adonai daber pi, vivarech kol basar shem kochol olam v'ed, v'anach nevarech ya, me'atav et olam, hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah nafshi et Adonai. Im lo Adonai leolam, alai tzion levador, hallelujah, hallelujah, ki tov zamra aloheinu, ki na'im navatila. Shabbat Magid Rav Yaakov, Chukav u'mishpatav l'Yisrael, lo asachen l'chol goy u'mishpatim bal yidaum, hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah Adonai min hashamayim. Yahalu Hashem Adonai, ki niskav shmo levado, hodo al eretz v'shamayim, v'yarem keren le'amo, tehila l'chol chazidav, v'nisrael m'krovo, hallelujah. Hallelujah, shir Adonai shir chadash, tilato, bikal chasidim. L'asor malchei mizikim v'nichbadem b'chavlei barzel l'asor behem mishpat katuv hadarhu l'chol chasidav hallelujah hallelujah hallel b'kodsho hallelujah 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 Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah. Kol anshama te hallelujah. Hallelujah. Kol hanshama tehallelujah. Hallelujah, 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 hallelujah. Baruch Adonai leolam, amen v'amen. Baruch Adonai mitzvah shechani shalayim, hallelujah. Baruch Adonai Elohim Yisrael Tzlani Flo Levado, Baruch Shem Kodo leolam, v'yimleich Vodo Kol haaretz, amen v'amen. We rise, page 90. Vayivarech David Adonai, l'nei kol ha'kahal v'yomer David. Ata Adonai levadecha, Atahu Adonai Moshe b'charta be'Avram, ve'otzeito me'or kasdim, v'samta shmo Avraham, u'matzata levavo ne'eman lefanecha, v'charot imo habrit, V'hayam lakata lifneihem, v'yavru b'toch hayam b'yabasha, v'edrolfei mishlach tovim tzolot, kemo evim b'mayim azim, v'yosh Adonai b'yom hahu, et Yisrael mi'am Yitzrayim, v'yar Yisrael Mitzrayim, et atzvat hayam, v'yar Yisrael di'ad agala, asher as Adonai b'Mitzrayim, v'yiram et Adonai, v'aminim Adonai, Moshe avdo, Az Yashir Moshe, u'bnei Yisrael, Yishra Azol Adonai v'emor le'mor. Adonai yimloch l'olam moed, Adonai yimloch l'olam moed. Ki l'Adonai hamlucha Moshe v'goyim, ba'al l'moshim ha'etzim l'shpot ha'esav, v'aytal Adonai hamlucha, v'haya Adonai l'melech al kol haaretz, v'yamahu Adonai echad, u'shemo echad. Page 334. Nishmat kochai, Tevarech et Shimcha Adonai Eloheinu, V'ruach Page 336, 8 lines from the top of the page. Ki chol pelecha yodeh, v'chol lashon lecha tishava, v'chol berech lecha tichra, v'chol koma lefanecha tishtachaveh, v'chol levavot yiraucha, v'chol kerev uchayot yizamru lishmecha, kadavar shekatuv, kol atzmotai tomarna Adonai michamocha, matzilani mechazak mimenu, ve'ani ve'vyon migozalo, mid melach umi yishvelach, umi yaroch lach, ha'el ha'gadol ha'gibor v'anora, El Elyon koneh shamayim v'aretz, nehalelcha neshabecha u'nefayecha, u'nevarech et shem kodshecha kamor leDavid. Barchi nafshi et Adonai v'chol keravai et shem kodsho. Ha'el b'tatumo tuzecha ha'gadol b'chvod shemecha ha'gibor say, Ram Venisa. We continue with the formal chanting of Shachrit. In the middle of page 336, Steve's going to be leading us this morning in Shachrit. The last couple of times we daven Shachrit, we began only 6 words sooner with the word Hamelech, the sovereign. On Shabbat, we start with the words Shochein Ad. God is the one who inhabits eternity. Since Shabbat is considered that space of eternity, a taste of the world to come, it is fitting that our appellation, our name for God on Shabbat is related to the idea of eternity. We turn to page 336, the bottom of the page, Shochein Ad.
Shochein ad marom v'kadosh shemo v'chaturanu tzadikim baranai l'shirin avati laha b'fir shirim tit halal v'divrei tzadikim tit barach v'velshon chasidim tit romam v'b'kerev kadoshim tit kadash v'machalot rivavot amcha beit Yisrael b'rishmecha malkeinu gador v'ador shechein chovot kol yitzrim l'fanech Adonai Eloheinu v'Elohei avotenu lehodot lehalel leshabeach lefer l'romeim lehader levarek le'alel kales al kol divrei shirot v'tishbechot David ben Yishai avdecha meshichecha Yishtabach Shimcha La'ad Malkeinu
We rise for Yishtabach.
Haaretz Ki Lecha Na'el Eloheinu V'Elohei Avotenu Shiru Shvacha L'V'Zimra Ozim Memshala Netzah Gedula Ugvura Gila V'Tiferet Kedusha U'Malchut Brachot Ve'Hodaot Me'ata Ve'ad Olam Baruch Atah Adonai Melech Gadol Batishbachot El Hadot Adonai Niflaot Abocher b'shirei zimra melech elchei ha'olamim.
Having no minyan, we continue in the middle of page 340 with the first bracha before Kriyat Shema, the third line on the page.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech ha'olam yotzer or uvorei choshech osei shalom uvorei et hakol.
Art reminds me that I forgot that on Shabbat Shuvah it's customary to read Psalm 130, which is on page 134. So we're going to go back and do that. We rise as the ark is open. It's in the middle of page 134.
At the bet, right?
Yeah, bet.
Shir hamalot mimalakim karot Adonai.
Shir hamalot mimalakim Adonai. Shima b'koli tiyana lecha kashuvo l'kol tachnunai. Im avonot tishmor ya Adonai miyamod. Ki imcha slicha leman tivarei.
Ki amcha slicha leman tivarei.
Ki v'iti Adonai kivta nafshi v'lidvaro chalti.
Ki v'ita Adonai kivta nafshi v'lidvaro.
Nafshi l'Adonai mishomrim laboker, shomrim laboker.
Nafshi l'Adonai mishomrim laboker, shomrim laboker.
Yachel Yisrael el Adonai, ki im Adonai hachesed v'arbei mofedut.
Yachel Yisrael Adonai, ki im Adonai hachesed v'arbei mofedut.
Vehu yifted Yisrael mikol avonotav.
Vehu yifted Yisrael mikol avonotav.
We return back to page 340. You may be seated as we continue with the Kriyat Shema, the blessings before the Shema.
Akol
Kol
Yom
Yodecha v'Kol Yeshav Kol.
Akol Yom Shmucha Akol Yom Ruhu En Kadosh Kadanai. In kerech echad an Eloheinu ba'olam hazeh, ve'ein zeletecha malkeinu lechai olam haba, eves botecha go aleinu limot hamashiach, ve'ein domeh lecha moshienu litchiat hametim. El Adon al kol ha-ma'asim baruch u'mevorach befi kol neshama golo v'tuvo male olam da'atu tvuna sovivimoto Hamid Ga'el al Chayot HaKodesh V'neder Bechavod Al HaMerkava Zechu Tu Mishor Lifnei Chiso Chesed V'rachamim Lifnei Chevoto Tovim Me'orot Shebara Eloheinu Yitzaram B'da'at B'vina Uvaskel Koach Ugvura Natan Bahem Liot Moshlim B'kerev Tevel Meleim Ziv U'mefikim Noga Na'ev V'zivam V'chol ha'olam Zmechim B'tzetam V'sasim B'voham Osim E'maritzon Konam Pe'er V'chavod Nodnim Lishmot Sola Verina L'zecher Malchuto Kara L'Shemesh V'yizrach Ora'ah Ikid Surat Halvana Shevach Nodnim Lo Kol Tzeva Ha'marob Tiferet Ugedula Trafi Ve'ofani Ve'chayot HaKodesh Le'el Asher Shavad Mikol HaMa'asihim Yom HaShviti Titbarak Moshienu al Shevach Maaseh Yadecha ve'al meorei or she'asita yafaruhu chasela. Titbarak Tzureinu Malkinu v'Koaleinu Borei Kadoshim Yishbach Shem Chalad Malkinu. Kulam ahovim, kulam borim, kulam begorim, bekulam osim, be'emar v'ratzon ratzon konaham, ve'chulam potchim et pichem, b'kdusha v'tohara, v'shira v'zimra, u'mevarchim u'meshabchim, u'mefa'arihim, u'ma'aritzihim, u'ma'akdishim, u'ma'amlichim, et shem ha'el, ha'melech ha'gadol, ha'givorn ha'rakadoshu, ve'kulam mekablim alehem, u'malchut shabayim zemizeh, ve'notnim Reshut zelazeh, lehaktish lotzam benachat ruach, besafa v'rura uvinima kadosha, kulam ke'echad onim ve'omrihim be'yirah, Kadosh, 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 Adonai Tzvaot, Melech ha'aretz kevodo, ve'ha'ofani v'chayot ha'kodesh, berash kadol mitnasim, le'matzrafim, le'umatam meshabchim ve'omrim, Baruch kavod Adonai mimkomo, El Baruch nemo yitenu, Melech ha'chai v'kayam. Or Chadash al Tzion Ta'ir, 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 V'nizke chulanu mehera le'oro, V'nizke chulanu mehera le'oro, Baruch atah Adonai Yotzer HaMeorot. Avarava avtanu Adonai Eloheinu Chemla gedola vitera Chamlata aleinu Avinu malkeinu Bavur avotenu Shabbatku vecha Avinu malkeinu Vatelamdem chukechaim Kentechonenu utlamdenu Avinu ha'av harachaman Amrachem rachem aleinu V'ten belibenu lehavin lehaskil lishmoa lilmodu lelamed lishmor velasot Ulekayim et kol divrei Talmud Toratecha v'ahava V'ha'erenenu b'toratecha V'davek libeinu b'mitzvotecha V'yached levavenu le'ahava u'yira et shemecha Elo nevosh le'olam va'ed V'elo nevosh le'olam va'ed Ki v'shem kodshecha Hagadol v'hanora batachnu Nagila v'nismecha b'shuatecha V'havienu l'shalom Me'arba kanfot ha'aretz v'toholichenu Kumemiyud le'artzenu Ki el poel Yeshuotata Uvanu v'acharta Mikolam v'lashon V'kerav tanu L'shimcha hagadol Sela be'emet Lehodot lecha U'yachedcha be'ahava Baruch atah Adonai Abocher b'amu Yisrael be'ahava Neman Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad Ve'ahavata et Adonai Elohecha B'chol levavcha u'b'chol nafshecha u'b'chol me'odecha Ve'hayu hadvarim ha'ele Asher anochi mitzavecha Ayom al levavecha V'shinanta ha'am levanecha V'dibarta ha'bam V'shivtecha ha'b'veitecha V'velektecha ha'avaderech V'shokpecha ha'uvkumecha V'kshartam le'yot al yadecha V'hayu l'totafot beinenecha Uktavta ha'am al mezuzot beitecha U'vihisharecha Adonai Elohechem emet. Lador vador hu kayam ushmo kayam v'chiso nachon malchuto v'emunato la'ahad kayamet v'dvarav chayim v'chayamim. Emet she'atahu Adonai Eloheinu v'Elohei avotenu malkeinu melech avotenu go'aleinu go'al avotenu yotzreinu tzur yeshuatenu podenu matzilenu me'olam shemecha ein Elohim zulatecha Ezrat avotenu atahu me'olam. Tehilot le'elyon baruch hu mevorach Moshe v'nei Israel lechanu shiraha b'simcha rabah ve'amruhu chulam mi chamocha ba'elim Adonai mi kamocha nedar b'kodesh nohora tehilot osef eleh Shira chadasha shibchu ge'ulim l'shimcha al sfatayam yachad kulam hodu v'him lichu ve'amru Adonai yimloch le'olam va'ed.
We rise, page 352 for Tzur Yisrael, followed by the individual whispered Amidah for Shabbat morning, which begins on page 354. Don't forget to include in your individual whispered Amidah the sections for the Shabbat before Yom Kippur, Zochreinu l'chaim, HaMelech HaKadosh, etc. And we continue with Tzur Yisrael, page 352.
Tzur Yisrael, Kuma be'ezrat Yisrael, Uvdechinu mecha, Yehuda ve'Yisrael, Go aleinu Adonai tzvaot shemo, Kedosh Yisrael, Baruch atah Adonai, Gal Yisrael.
Okay. Shabbat Shalom.
Good job.
We're going to continue with the psalm for the month of Elul, which can be found on page 40.
Let David Adonai Yishimi Miranas Mikah. Luhule emunanti lirot betov Adonai be'eretz chaim kavel Adonai chazek v'yametz libecha v'kavel Adonai.
Kaddish Avelim, Mourner's Kaddish, page 52. Yitgadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabbah
Amen.
v'yalma divra kirutei v'yamlich malchutei v'chayechon uv'yomechon uv'chayei d'chol beit Yisrael v'agalau v'zman kariv v'imru Amen. Yehi shmei Rabbah mevarach le'alam olamei almayah. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh v'yitadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal shmei d'kudesha b'richu. Le'ela mikol birchata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechamata damiran be'alma v'imru Amen. Yehi shlama Rabbah min shemaya v'chayim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru Amen. Oseh shalom imramav Hu yaseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru Amen. Shabbat Shalom, and welcome to Congregation Agudat Achim's in-person and live stream Shabbat morning service. I'm Rabbi Rafi Spitzer. It's a pleasure to join with you on this Shabbat Shuvah, this Shabbat between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, a Shabbat which is a siman for the rest of the year, a Shabbat in which it's important for us to think about how we are committing to the practices and ideas and values which we want to continue to hold forth with throughout the coming year. We call this Shabbat Shabbat Shuvah, the Shabbat of return, of turning back, of turning again. And as I said in last night's service, Shabbat Shuvah is a Shabbat on which we think about the words which we say in our Torah service, Hashivenu Adonai Elecha v'nashuva chadesh yameinu kekedem. This idea that God and we are partners in the process of returning to each other. That if we begin the process of returning on Rosh Hashanah, our hope is that God reciprocates and comes and meets us part way. And if we think about Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur as this holy time of repentance, of teshuvah, of return, of turning back, the midpoint is Shabbat. And so we have this moment on Shabbat Shuvah where perhaps there's a moment of meeting, a moment of God and the Jewish people coming together. Today is also September 11th, and I do have some poems of remembrance, and I'll be speaking a little bit later about the significance of remembering the tragedy of September 11th, 2001, 20 years later, and its connection to Shabbat Shuvah, connection to this Shabbat of return and of turning, of reflecting, a Shabbat where our destinies are hanging in the balance. Well, Yasher Koach to Steve for leading us in Shachrit and for continuing to lead us in the Torah service. And we can turn now to the Torah service on page 394, remembering that we are continuing to do Hagva at the beginning of the Torah service, and that everybody who has been honored with an aliyah to the Torah should have a visual recognition of the text of the Torah. The Torah reading for Shabbat Shuvah is from Parashat Vayelech, the very end of Moshe's speeches to the people, and it is in those speeches, contained in those speeches, are a great many lessons about what it means to have consciousness of our own mortality. As Moshe knows that he is about to die, he is just pages in the book away from his own death, and his last words are an incredibly poignant deathbed appeal to the Jewish people. We turn now to page 394, the service for taking the Torah out of the ark.
In kamocha v'Elohim Adonai ve'in kamasecha malchutecha malchut kol olamim umemshaltecha bechol dor vador Adonai melech Adonai malach Adonai yimloch le'olam va'ed Adonai oz le'amo yitein Adonai yivarech et amo v'shalom Av harachamim Heitiva b'erzoncha et Zion Tivnei chomot Yerushalayim Tivnei chomot Yerushalayim Ki v'cha levad batachnu Melech Aram v'Isa Adon olamim.
We rise as the ark is open.
Vayhi bin so Aharon, Vayomer Moshe, Kuma Adonai, Veyafutsu oivecha, Veyanusu mesanecha mipanecha, Ki mitzion tetzei Torah, Ki mitzion tetzei Torah, Udavar Adonai miYerushalayim Baruch Shenatan Torah Torah Baruch Shenatan Torah Torah Le'amo Yisrael Bigdushato. Be'anarachet velish mekadisha kadisha yakira ana emar tushbechan yehera kodama v'tiftach libi be'oraita V'tashli mishalin delibi V'lihiba dechol amach Yisrael L'tav u'l'chaim V'lishlam Amen. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad.
Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad.
Echad Eloheinu, Gadol Adonenu, Kadosh Shemo.
Echad Eloheinu, Gadol Adonenu.
Gadol Adonai iti, v'ramemo Shemo yachdav.
Echad Adonai Hagedula, Ve'Hagevura, Ve'Atiferet, Ve'Nesach, Ve'Hod, Nicho B'Shamayim U'Ba'aretz. Echad Adonai Hamamlacha, Ve'Aminaseh Lechol Erosh. Ramemu, Ramemu, Adonai Eloheinu, Ve'yishtachavu, Ve'yishtachavu, Ve'omar Kadoshu, Ramemu, Ramemu, Adonai Eloheinu, Ve'yishtachavu, Ve'yishtachavu, Ve'harkocho, Ki Kadosh Adonai Eloheinu. We remain standing for the Hagbah.
Zezot HaTorah asher sam Moshe lifnei bnei Yisrael al pi Adonai b'yad Moshe.
Parshat Vayelech can be found on page 1173.
Getting more complicated.
Vayazor v'yagin v'yoshia l'chol ha'chosim bo v'nomar amen. Hakol havu g'dolinu kavod la'torah. Tamod Rivka Sarah bat Moshe Pesach v'ashrei hinda aliyah rishona baruch shenatan Torah l'may Yisrael b'tushato atem advikim aleichem chaim luchem hayom. Since we did not do Baruch Hu yet this morning, having not had a minyan until the Torah service, the Baruch Hu that Rachel is about to do is our Baruch Hu, our call to worship. So I invite you to stand to be able to respond to her Baruch Hu as we continue with the Torah service, page 1173 in our Chumashim.
Baruch Hu et Adonai Hamborach.
Baruch Adonai Baruch Le'olam Va'ed.
Baruch Adonai Hamborach Le'olam Va'ed. Baruch et Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim v'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch et Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen. You may be seated.
Amen. Vayelech Moshe vaydaber et hadvorim ha'ele el kol Yisrael vayomer alehem ben me'ah v'yesrim shana anochi hayom lo chol od latet b'lavo Adonai amar elai lo tavor et hayarden hazeh Adonai Elohecha hu over lefanecha hu yashmid et hagoyim ha'ele milfanecha v'rishtam Yehoshua hu over lefanecha kasher diber Adonai.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan lanu Torat emet v'chayei olam nata b'tochenu. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen. The second.
She has a second lead. Oh, you do. Marilyn. Rabbi Marilyn.
Oh, Talmud.
No, wait.
Talmud.
Give her.
Malka bat Sender Dovasara Aliyah Shenit. The second Aliyah can be found on page 1173, verse 4. Baruch Adonai Baruch Leolam Vaed.
Baruch Adonai Hamavorach Le'olam Va'ed. Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu melech olam, asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim, v'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch Atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen.
Amen.
Amen. V'yasa Adonai lachem kasher asa l'sichon u'la'og malchei ha'emori u'li'artzam asher hishmidotam u'tanam Adonai lifnechem v'asitem lachem kechol ha'mitzvah asher tziviti etchem v'chizku v'imtzu al tiru v'al taratzu mipnehem ki Adonai Elohecha Hu ha'holech imach v'lo yirpacha
V'lo ya'azveka.
Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu melech olam, asher natan lanu Torat emet, v'chayei olam natan b'tochenu. Baruch Atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen.
Amen.
Are you? Yamod Arab.
Raphael Pinchas Elazar.
Raphael Pinchas Elazar.
Ben Aaron.
Ben Aaron.
Harav.
Harav. Miriam.
Lina.
Leah. Shlishi.
Baruch Hu et Adonai Amborach.
Baruch Adonai Baruch Leolam Vaed.
Baruch Adonai Baruch Leolam Vaed. Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim v'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch Atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen.
Amen. V'ikra Moshe liYoshua Vayomer elav le'nei kol Yisrael Zak v'yemat Ki atah tavo et ha'am hazeh el ha'aretz asher nishba Adonai lavotam lotet lahem v'atah tanchi lena otam v'Adonai hu ha'olech l'fanecha hu yeh imach v'lo yirpecha v'lo yazveka v'lo tera v'lo techat v'yechtov Moshe Vaytov Moshe haTorah hazot vayitna el hakohanim b'nei Levi hanos im et Aaron brit Adonai v'el kol ziknei Yisrael.
Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan lanu Torat emet v'chayei olam natan b'tochenu. Baruch Atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen.
Tamod. Eliana bat Avram v'Gila. Aliyah Revi'it. The fourth Aliyah can be found on page 1174, verse 10.
Baruch Hu et Adonai Hamvorach.
Baruch Adonai Baruch Leolam Vaed.
Baruch Adonai Baruch Leolam Vaed. Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim v'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch Atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Amen. Vayitzav Moshe otam le'emor miketz sheva shanim b'moed shnat hashmita b'chag haSukkot b'vo kol Yisrael lirot et pnei Adonai Elohecha b'makom asher yivcha tikra et haTorah hazot neged kol Yisrael be'aznehem hakel et ha'am ha'anashim v'hanashim mechataf v'gerecha asher bisharecha leman yishme'u leman yilmedu v'yiru et Adonai Elohechem v'shamru la'asot et kol divrei haTorah hazot uvneihem asher lo yadu yishme'u v'lamdu lira et Adonai Elohechem kol hayamim Asher atem chayim al ha'adamo, asher atem ovrim et hayarden, shama l'rishta.
Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher natan lanu Torah emet v'chayei olam natan b'tochenu. Baruch Atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen. Tamod. Esther Aliyah Chamishit. The Aliyah which we just read, the fourth Aliyah, contains in it yet another command related to the Shemitah or sabbatical year of release, which I spoke about on the second day of Rosh Hashanah. For those who did not get a chance to hear my sermons on Rosh Hashanah, they are available, just the clip of the recording that is my sermon, so those are available on the website. But the second day of Rosh Hashanah, I spoke about Shemitah. One other way that the Shemitah is connected is what we just read, that every seventh year it was commanded to read the Torah out loud to the whole people. Now it's interesting, right? Clearly the book of Deuteronomy isn't aware of our current custom, which is to read publicly the Torah every week until we've read the whole thing every year, right? The book of Deuteronomy imagines just reading at Hakel, on this day of assembly, on the holiday of Sukkot, once every 7 years, and then you read the whole Torah. And some commentators say that when the book of Deuteronomy says the Torah, it really just means the book of Deuteronomy itself. But even if you were just reading the whole book of Deuteronomy all at once, that's a different way of conceiving of or thinking about this experience of receiving Torah. Throughout the book of Deuteronomy, Moshe, the book consistently says Hayom, today. And that word today is a little bit ambiguous. Is it referring to the day that the people received the Torah originally at Sinai? Is it referring to the day that Moshe is speaking in the text? Or does it refer to any day that the words are read? And there's definitely a way in which Hakel, the day of assembly, once every 7 years, is one of the possibilities of what Hayom, what today means. There's a custom of reading the whole book of Deuteronomy on the seventh day of Sukkot, that is right before Simchat Torah. So on Simchat Torah, we read the very end of the book of Deuteronomy. But there's a custom on Hoshana Rabbah, on the final day of Sukkot, to read through the entire book of Deuteronomy so that you're ready to read the ending, right? To review what we've been reading all through these past weeks. To hear Moshe's speeches as they were given in one chunk, as opposed to piecemeal, the way that we read them. There's something very powerful about this idea of the entire Jewish people all together experiencing this. And it says, and their children too, who have not had the experience, shall hear and learn to revere the Lord your God, right? So that that's the people that Moshe is talking about here. We did not experience the Exodus from Egypt, but we are able to connect deeply to this, to feel like we indeed are a part of the people who are receiving this tradition. So, yet another aspect of the seventh year, and as we are now in Shanat HaShemitah, the year of remission, it is important for us to think about in what ways are we giving Torah over as part of this year. How are we connecting to the year of release by deepening our study of Torah together? We continue with the fifth Aliyah, page 1175, verse 14.
Baruch hu atah Adonai hamvarach.
Baruch Adonai Baruch Le'olam Va'ed.
Baruch Adonai hamvarach le'olam va'ed. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim v'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen.
Amen. Vayomer Adonai el Moshe, hinkavu yamecha, lamot kara et Yishoshu, v'yityatzvu, v'yohel moed v'atzavenu, v'yelech Moshe v'Yoshua, v'yityatzvu b'yohel moed, v'yera Adonai b'ohel ba'amod anan, Vayamod, Amod, Hanan, El Petach Ohel, ויאמר אדוני אל משה הנך שכב עם אבותיך וקם העם הזה לזנה אחרי אלוהיך הארץ אשר הוא בשמה בקרבו ועזבני להפר את בריתי אשר קראתי איתו וחרה על פיו ביום ההוא ועזבתי והסתרתי פני מהם והיה לכל ומצאו רבות בצרות ואמר ביום ההוא הלא על כי אין אלוהי בקרבי מצאוני הרעות האלה ואנוכי אסתיר פני ביום ההוא על כל הרעה אשר עשה כי פנה אל אלוהים אחרים ועתה כתבו לכם את השירה הזאת ולמדה את בני ישראל שימה בפיהם למען תהיה לי השירה הזאת לעד בבני ישראל.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan lanu Torah emet v'chayei olam nata b'tochenu. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen.
Is it me? I guess it's me.
Yamod.
Shimshon ben Yeshia.
Shimshon ben Yeshia. Aliyah. Shishit. The sixth Aliyah can be found on page 1177, verse 20.
Baruch hu Adonai Amvorah.
Baruch Adonai Baruch
Baruch Adonai Baruch Le'olam Va'ed. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher b'karbanu mikol amim v'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen. Ki avienu el ha'adama asher nishpati lavotah. Zavat halav udvash ve'achal v'sava v'dashen upana Elohim achirim v'avadum v'niatzuni v'hefer et briti v'yakitim tzenaoto ra'ot rabo v'tzarot v'yanta hashira hazot לפניו לעד כי לא תשכח מפי זרעו כי ידעתי את יצרו אשר הוא עשה היום בטרם אבינו אל הארץ אשר נשבעתי ויכתוב משה את השירה הזאת ביום ההוא וילמדה את בני ישראל ויצב את יהושע בן נון ויאמר חזק ואמץ כי אתה תביא את בני ישראל אל הארץ אשר נשבעתי להם ואנוכי אהיה עמך ויהי ככלות משה לכתוב את דברי התורה הזאת על ספר עצומה.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan lanu Torah emet v'chayei olam nata b'tochenu. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen. Talmud.
Tanya Rachel bat Hina Fahaya.
Hashavi'it. The seventh Aliyah can be found on page 1178, verse 25.
Baruch hu et Adonai Hamvorah.
Baruch Adonai Baruch Le'olam Va'ed.
Baruch Adonai Hamvorach Le'olam Va'ed. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim v'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen.
Amen. Vaytzav Moshe et Haleviim Nasi Aaron Brit Adonai Lemor Lako et Sefer HaTorah Hazeh V'samtem Oto Mitzad Aaron Brit Adonai Elohechem V'haya Shem B'chol Ha'ed Sham B'chol Ha'ed Ki Anochi Yadati et Mericha et Arpacha HaKosher Hein Bodeni Chai Machem Hayom ממרים, הייתם עם אדוני, ואף כי אחרי מותי, הקהילו אלי את כל זקני שבטיכם ושוטריכם, וידברו באזניהם. את הדברים האלה, והעידה בם את השמיים ואת הארץ, כי ידעתי אחרי מותי, כי השחיתון וסרתם מן הדרך אשר ציוויתי אתכם, וקרא אתכם הרעה באחרית הימים, כי תעשו את הרעה בעיני אדוני, להכיסו במעשה ידיכם. וידבר משה באזני כל קהל ישראל את דברי השירה הזאת עד תומה.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan lanu Torah emet b'chayei olam nata b'tochinu Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen. Caitlin, we also wish you a happy birthday in honor of your Aliyah. We rise as the ark is open for our healing prayer. Mishebeirach avoteinu mekor abraham ve'imotenu. May the source of strength, who bless the ones before us, help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say Amen. Mishebeirach avoteinu Avraham Yitzchak Yaakov Sarah Rivka Rachel Leah Yivrech Perpet HaCholim Et Lesar Ved Mari Travaizo Vet Akiva Ben Gittel Vet Miriam Bat Malka Vet Jackie Friedlander Vet Shalom Ben Chaya Vet Bracha Bat Myra Vet Linda Pearlstein Vet Michal Bat Tova Vet Michael Roberts Vet Eric Hurst Vet Riva Bela Bat Avram Chaim Bereza Vet Yaakov Moshe Ben Batya Mindel Vet Malka Bat Golda Vet Fegalea Bat Minsasura Vet Tamar Chaya Ben Ruven HaKohen Bat Ruven HaKohen Vet Osher Yosef Ben Fegal Malka Vet Andrew Parisi Vet Chris Parisi Vet Chaim David Ben Ido Vet Masha Pesca Bat Chana Vet Yaakov Ben Laura Vet Yoreh Bat Sarah Avraham Vet Mindel Bat Dobachaya Vet Devorah Bat Rochel Vet kol hakolim bigla gashazot hakadosh baruch hu yimalei rachamim alehem lachti kam rapatam yishlach lahem meira refuah shem amin hashamayim refuat hanefesh refuat haguf l'chol evreihem v'gidehem dok shar chalei Yisrael v'haolam v'chizek et yidei otzkim b'tzorchayhem Shabbat imel zok v'harufuah krava lavo ashta bagalav izman kariv v'nomar amen. Mishebeirach imotenu mekor habracham lavotenu. Bless those in need of healing with refuah shalema, the renewal of body, the renewal of spirit, and let us say Amen. Yitkadal, Yitkadash Shemei Rabba, Yamadi Rak Yurtei V'yamlich Machutei B'chayei Chonu, Yomei Chonu, B'chayei Dechol Beit Yisrael, Bagala, Uvizman Kariv Imeru, Amen. Yeshmei Rabba Mevarach Le'alam La'amei Almaya Barach Vishtabach Vipar Vitraman Vinasei Vidadar Vidalai Vidalal Shmei Dekudesha Leila Leila Mikol Birchada V'shirata Tushbechada V'nechamata Damiran Belma Vimru Amen. We continue with the Maftir Aliyah, Talmud. Gila ba Moshe v'yoreh. Aliyah, Likriyata Haftarah. The Maftir Aliyah can be found on page 1178, verse 28.
Baruch hu et Adonai Amvorach.
Baruch Adonai Baruch Le'olam Va'ed.
Baruch Adonai Baruch Le'olam Va'ed. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bachar banu mikol amim v'natan lanu et Torto. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen.
Amen. Hakilu alai et kol ziknei shiftechem b'shotrechem b'yadar bara b'yaznehem et hadvarim ha'ele v'ha'ida bam et hashamayim b'yed ha'aretz ki yadati acharei moti ki hashchit hashchitun v'satem min haderech asher tziviti etchem v'karat etchem hara'a b'acharit hayamim ki tasu et hara'a b'nei Adonai l'hafiso b'masei dechem v'yidaber Moshe Be'aznei kol kahal Yisrael et divrei hashira azot atumam.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan lanu Torat emet v'chayei olam nata b'tocheinu Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen. The Haftarah for Shabbat Shuvah is in fact the reason why Shabbat Shuvah is called Shabbat Shuvah. The first word of the Haftarah from the book of Hosea, chapter 14, is Shuvah, turn, return, turn back, come home. And we are deeply thinking about this idea of teshuvah, of return, of homecoming, as we are in this moment between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. This Haftarah very much deeply connects to the themes of the high holy days and the passages from the book of Hosea and from the book of Micha very much connect deeply too. So you can follow along on page 1235, page 1235 as Gila reads from the book of Hosea and the book of Micha.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bachar b'nviim tovim b'ratah b'divreihem hane'emarim be'emet Baruch atah Adonai habocher b'Torah u'b'Moshe abdo u'v'Yisrael amo u'v'nviei ha'emet v'tzedek. Shuvah Yisrael ad Adonai Elohecha ki shechalta bonecha kechu imachem dvarim b'shuvat el Adonai imru elav kol tisa avon v'kach tov u'neshalma parim shvatenu ashur lo yoshienu kisus lo nirkav v'lo nemar od Eloheinu Eloheinu lemaseh yadenu asher b'cha yirachum yatom arpa mishuvatam ohavim nidava ki shavapi mimenu Eheye katal Israel yifrach kishoshana v'yach shirashav bilvanon Yelchu inak kotav vayhi kazayit todah v'reach lo kilvanon yivashu yoshvei bitzilo yichayu dagan yifruchu gafen zichru kiyayin levanon Ephraim mali od leetzbim ani aniti V'yishrenu ani kivarosh ra'anan mimeni piryecha nimtza mi chacham v'yavein eleh navon v'yadam ki yishavrim darchei Adonai v'tzadikim yachu vam uveshu yichshavu vam Tika shofar b'tzion, kidshu tzom kir'u atzara. Huh? Okay.
Just skip right to there.
Mi el kamocha, nesei avam vilver, al pesha l'sherit nachalto, lo hachazik la'ad apo, ki chafetz chesed hu, yashuv yirachmeinu, yichbibosh abonotenu, v'tashlich, v'mitzulot yam kol chatotam, titain emet liakov, chesed le'avraham, asher nishbatal lavoteten, mimei kadem. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, tzur kol amim, tzadik b'chol dorot, ha'ne'eman, ha'omer v'yoseh, ha'medaber kayem, shechol devarav emet v'tzedek. Ne'eman atahu Adonai Eloheinu, v'ne'emanim devarecha, devar echad midvarecha, achar lo yoshev rekam, ki al melech ne'eman, v'rachaman atah, Baruch atah Adonai, Ha'el ne'eman b'chol dvarav.
Amen.
Rachem al Tzion ki hi veit chayinu, ulu v'nefesh toshia b'meira b'yameinu. Baruch atah Adonai,
Baruch Shemo.
Esameach Tzion b'vaneha.
Amen.
Samcheinu Adonai Eloheinu be'eliyahu hanavi avdecha, u'malchut beit avim mishichecha b'meira yavo v'yagel libeinu. Al kisei lo yeshiv zar, v'lo yinchelu od acherim et kvodo, ki v'shem kadsha nishbata lo, shelo yichba neira le'olam va'ed. Baruch atah Adonai, Magen David. Al Torah v'al avodah v'al nevi'im v'al yom haShabbat hazeh shenatata lanu Adonai Eloheinu likdusha u'liminucha lechavod u'tifaret. Al kol Adonai Eloheinu anachim odim lach u'mvarchim otach yiparashim chavafiko chai tamid li'olam va'ed. Baruch atah Adonai mekadesh haShabbat.
Amen. Shka.
Thank you.
We continue now with the Ashrei, which can be found on page 420.
Ashrei Oshrei Veitecha Od Yehalu Chasela.
Ashrei Am Shekachalo, Ashrei Am.
Tehillah LeDavid Aramim Chalu Hai Chamelech Baruch Shimcha Leolam Va'ed.
Bechol Yom Avarchek Aval Shimcha Leolam Va'ed.
Gadol Adonai Halo Meod Veligdulato Ein Cheker. Hadar Kevod Hodecha V'divrei Niflotecha Asticha.
Vezuz Naratecha Yomeru Dulatcha Asaprena.
Zecher Avtu Chayabiu V'tzidkatcha Yeranenu.
Chanun Rachum Adonai Erchapayim Ugdal Chafed.
Tov Adonai La Kol Rachamav Al Kol Maasav.
Yoducha Adonai Kol Maasecha V'chasidecha Yivarchucha.
Kevod Malchutecha Yomeru Gvuratecha Yidaberu.
Leodia Livnei Adam Gvurotav Uchvod Adar Malchuto.
Malchutecha Malchu Kol Amimu Memshaltecha Bechol Dor Vador.
Someich Adonai Lechol Anoflim V'zokef Lechol HaKufim.
Einei Kol Elecha Yisaberu Ve'atanotin Lachem Etochlam Beito.
Poteach et Yadecha Umasbiya Lechol Chayratzon.
Tzadik Adonai Bechol Teracha V'chasid Bechol Maasav.
Karov Adonai Lechol Korav Lechol Asher Yikra'u Be'emet.
Ritzon Yeraya V'yaseh Ve'et Shavatam Yishma V'yoshiem.
Shomer Adonai Ekol Oava V'Ekol Rishaim Yashmin.
Tehillat Adonai Yadaber Pi V'varach Kol Basar Shem Kodesh Le'olam Va'ed.
V'anachnu nevarech Yameata V'ad Olam. Hallelujah. We eyes as the ark is open for the returning of the Sefer Torah, page 422.
Yahalelu et Shem Adonai, ki niskav Shemo levado. Ado aretz v'shamayim, vayarem keren le'amo, tehila lechol chasidav, livnei Yisrael am kerovo. Hallelujah, hallelujah, mizmor leDavid. Ubnucho Yomar. Ki lekach tov natati lachem, torati al tazovu. Et chaim hi, lama chazikim ba. Vetom checha merushar derachecha darchei noam v'chol netivoteha shalom hashiveinu Adonai Kadesh, Kadesh Yameinu, Kadesh Yameinu, may be seated. So here's what I'd like to do this morning for my sermon, my teaching. I'm going to share some thoughts, and then anybody who would like to reflect on what it means to be sitting here 20 years after 9/11, whether you want to share where you were on that day or what it means to you, or if you weren't alive then and you want to say what it's meant to you to learn about it. If you have any reflection that is appropriate to a Shabbat Shuvah that is also September 11th, 20 years after the tragedy of September 11th, 2001, I'm going to invite a few people to speak. So I'm telling you at the top so that you can think about it if there's something that you are feeling is important to say in this moment. And I'll ask anybody who does speak to come up and speak here at the microphone. We'll do that for a few minutes, and then I have some closing thoughts, and then a few prayers of memory. And that's what we're going to do today in recognition of this sacred moment, both in our Jewish ritual calendar and in our American sacred calendar. Unitane tokef kedushat hayom. Let us speak of the sacred power of this day, profound and awe-inspiring. We read the Unitane tokef prayer on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. This is the season of reading this prayer. Who will live and who will die? Who will live a long life and who will come to an untimely end? Who will perish by fire and who by water? Who by sword and who by beast? Who by hunger and who by thirst? Who by earthquake and who by plague? I think every time we got to Umi B'Magefa this year, I just got chills. And who by plague? And on the left-hand side of the page, there's a very nice reading in our Machzor. And it says, when we really begin a new year, it is decided, and when we actually repent, it is determined, who shall be truly alive and who shall merely exist.
Who shall be tormented by the fire of ambition? And who shall be overcome by the waters of failure? Who shall be pierced by the sharp sword of envy? And who shall be torn by the wild beast of resentment? In other words, this is a poem which turns each of these calamities into a metaphor. And I think that most of the time, that is a very legitimate way to understand this prayer. The sacred power of the day, who will live and who will die, maybe it doesn't really mean who will live and who will die, but it means what kind of character of life are we having? Are we choosing to truly live? My colleague, Rabbi Jonathan Kremer, wrote in 2002, until relatively recently, many of the fates specified in Unetane Tokef were only abstractions. I hadn't known anyone whose death had come about literally by fire, by sword, by beast, by plague, by strangling, or by stoning. But on September 11th, 2001, I learned that by fire, by sword are not abstractions, not figurative descriptions reinterpreted as self-inflicted suffering, as in, by the fire of ambition, the sword of envy. I have reluctantly become aware that what Unetane Tokef addresses is real death that can come today, tomorrow, next week. A life incinerated in a flaming skyscraper, struck down by the knife-wielding hands of humans, of human beasts, cut down by the spreading disease of extremism, choked by the smoke of burning jet fuel, or crushed by an avalanche of concrete and steel. And who among the survivors will succeed at living in peace, and who of them will be forever tormented? Perhaps teshuvah, tefillah, and tzedakah, repentance, prayer, and acts of generosity can make a difference in the course of this world. Perhaps not. But if we give up on examining ourselves, on seeking the divine and reaching out to others, we give up on so much of what can help us thrive, even as we live with the awareness that our hold on life is tenuous. We place our fate in God's hands, hoping and praying for a pain-free life, at least until next Yom Kippur. We are but fleeting shadows. Our share in this life is brief, precious, finite, and we are grateful for every moment. I'll share first, and then I'm going to wait and let other people who would like to share. I read a little bit ago, in anticipation of this 20th anniversary of 9/11, that there are more people, first responders and those living in Lower Manhattan, who have died from the effects of inhalation of carcinogens after 9/11 over the last 20 years than those who were killed in the terror attacks themselves. And as a person who was in 6th grade at the time, living in Boston, where the planes left from, and very deeply connected to Logan Airport, having traveled many times out of that same place. I've been to Manhattan many times. I was born in Manhattan. I really felt that sense of tragedy and horror. Like, my life changed in that moment, the character, the course of my childhood. When I read that more people have died of carcinogens since then, that the aftermath is continuing, right? It reminded me of the reports about like Hiroshima and Nagasaki, what war does to the world in the aftermath. And I can't help but think a little bit about what it means to have been the part of a generation that fought a 20-year war in Afghanistan that just ended. And how many countless people, Americans and Afghans and others in the world, did those actions continue the destruction and the violence and the death? And in what way did those actions make us safer or not safer? I think it remains to be seen. So that's where I am sitting in this moment of 20 years. Art.
So most of you know that I worked for over 30 years for the New York State Department of Taxation and Finance. And the tax department was particularly hard hit by 9/11. We lost 40 people in the towers that day. We have offices in the World Trade Center. And just two of the people who passed away had local connections to here. One was Charlie Mills. Charlie Mills was a deputy commissioner for enforcement. And the story about Charlie was that he was in the stairwell getting people out, because our offices were around the 50th floor, and trying to get people out as fast as he could. And he stayed behind trying to make sure as many people could get down the stairwell as possible. And he was caught up in that when the building collapsed. The other person is Diane Parsons. And Diane was an auditor from Clifton Park. And she was the nicest lady. She was stationed in Albany. And she just happened to be in New York that day and was killed in the towers just doing her job. And again, any other day she would have been safe in the state campus in Albany. And so those are just two of the 40 people that we lost. And so there is a tremendous impact on me for all those years that I worked at the tax department.
Thank you for sharing. Murray.
Two very brief stories. One is about a former member of this congregation, a Russian family, whom we adopted, and they have been very regular attendees until illness and other events prevented them from coming. And that's about the story about Vicky or Victoria Kiergay. She was working at the time for Fitzgerald Brothers, a bond brokerage in the tower. And when the first tower was hit, she called her mother on the cell phone, and she told her, "Mom, don't worry. We were told to sit still and not be panicked." And her mother says, "Get out of there." And she said, "Mom, but I'll lose the job." So "You'll find another job. Get out of there now." You walk out. And when she was talking to her, she walked out and walked away. As she walked away far enough, she saw their tower being hit, and over 200 employees of that firm were unfortunately killed, perished, and she really experienced an Untanetokev moment that wasn't her time yet to be taken away. On a personal note, when I was told about the event and went into our conference room, and I watched the towers, the first and the second, being destroyed. For the first time, I had the trepidation, the feeling of vulnerability. And in addition, frankly, there was that for the very first time, a kind of fear that I have not experienced since World War II. And every time I see the stories and watch the events of that period, it is a most difficult time for me.
Thank you for sharing. Alexandra.
I want to share two observations and memories. And the first one is that the person I knew best who died on September 11th was a colleague and classmate of mine in engineering at Stanford University who was on one of the airplanes. And every September 11th, I think about him because his name was Walid Joseph Iskandar, and he was from Lebanon. And I've always thought about him in particular because he was fluent in English and Arabic and French, and I don't know how many passengers on the plane knew exactly what was happening, but Walid would have understood everything that the hijackers were saying. And he was probably one of the few people that day who knew exactly what was happening before it happened. The other comment I want to make is really lifted from comments that my colleague, Drew Levy, who is a teacher of history at Emma Willard School, made yesterday during one of our weekly morning reports. He was talking about a few years ago, teaching a history class. He came into class the morning of September 11th and wrote on the board, 9/11, never forget. And that day, which was sort of a slogan that was very, very widely posted around both then and afterward. And he showed his class a photograph that was not widely distributed until quite a few years after September 11th. It was taken, forgive my lack of knowledge of New York geography, but probably in Brooklyn, and it shows a group of young people sitting in a waterfront park. They're clearly talking to each other. They're young adults, I would guess 20s or 30s. They're talking to each other. They seem to be smiling. The water is rippling in front of them, and beyond the water, the two towers are burning. He showed the photo to his class, and he asked the class, what emotions should this photo evoke in us? Should we be angry? I mean, he didn't ask that. He let the kids discuss it. And it was taken by a professional photographer who snapped the picture, and we don't know what the photographer did next. We don't know what the people did next. It's just a photograph sort of snapped an instant in time. And he commented that listening to the students' observations, there's an immediate reaction, which is, how can these people be talking and looking like they're having almost a picnic while the towers are burning? And the second observation is, you don't know what the conversation was or where it turned to afterward. And he said that after the class concluded, he went to the board to erase the words 9/11, never forget, in preparation for the next class or the next day. And he said he found this extremely difficult to do. And he says he continues to wrestle with what you know, what you don't know, when you can move on and when you should not move on. And I appreciated his sharing this with a group of students, none of whom were alive at the time of September 11th, and who should be looking both at the photos of the towers themselves and at the photos of the first responders and of the people who knew what was happening and of the people who didn't know what was happening.
Thank you for sharing. In this week's Torah portion, God describes very evocatively the consequences of not being in relationship with God. Of course, the book of Deuteronomy has whole lists of curses and blessings. Good stuff will happen if you do this, and bad stuff will happen if you do that, but it really gets distilled to one phrase in chapter 31. Vanochi haster astir panai bayom hahu, and I will keep my countenance hidden on that day. I will hide my face. As I said last night at Kabbalat Shabbat, the idea of God hiding God's face is one which returns over and over in our high holiday liturgy, especially in the Slichot, and which deeply connects the idea of Tisha B'Av, of Lamentations of Eicha, to Yom Kippur, to the holiday of Atonement. The psalm that we read throughout the month of Elul says, Al taster panecha mimeni, don't hide your face from me. God, we want to be in relationship with you. And God describes that God will, at times, hide God's face from us. This is Shabbat Shuvah, the Shabbat of return, of turning back, of homecoming, the Shabbat of connecting and reconnecting. And we say, Hashivenu Adonai Elecha v'nashuva, return us to you, God, and we will return. Right? There's a moving toward on both sides. God has to move towards us, and we have to move toward God. Now, this idea of hastarat panim, of God hiding God's face, is an idea which is from this week's Torah portion, but it's not only from this week's Torah portion. Right? Our major blessing, the blessing that the priests give the people, is that God will shine God's countenance upon you. Ya'er Adonai panav elecha v'chuneka. God should shine God's face toward you. God will turn God's face toward you. That is the sign of blessing. But nowhere in the Torah itself does it say that God will hide God's face until this moment, at the very end of Moshe's life. And I imagine Moshe there, almost on his deathbed, feeling distant in some ways from God, understanding that death is part of life, and that we respond to death in some ways by feeling distant. Or grief can make us feel distant from God. That we pray so hard to be in relationship, to be in connection, that in these moments of real difficulty, that's when we really want to feel the presence of community and the presence of other people and the presence of God. And I think that's why we do Shiva the way that we do Shiva, where a person who has just experienced a death then can't just be alone, but the community descends on their house and says, no, you're not alone. There is community. You are with people. We are not hiding our face from you. At times of national tragedy, it also feels at times like God's face is hidden. And the challenge that we have, I think, is to find how to see the presence of God and God's relationship to us, God's face, even at the times when it feels really challenging. But it's okay at times. I think one of the things that we can learn from Parashat Vayelech is that at times God's face will be hidden. There will be a sense of distance. But that sense of distance will come to an end, and there will be a sense of return. And we read this terrifying idea about God hiding God's face from us on Shabbat Shuvah, on the Shabbat of return. And we begin the Haftarah with the words Shuvah, return, so that we know that it's not a permanent turning away. but it's a turning away that is temporary and brief. I'll just leave us with one final thought, which is just after God says, I will hide my face from you, God also describes the Torah as a song. Ve'ata kitvu lachem et hashira hazot. Now, write down this shir, write down this song, and it refers to the whole Torah. And there's a command to express ourselves in song and poetry. That when we feel that God is distant, a response is to sing, to read poetry. The Midrash says, V'chol haTorah kula nikreit shira. The entire Torah is referred to as a song. V'tiferet hashir. And the great glory of song. He, Kishe hakolot mishonim zeh mizeh. The great glory of song is that different simultaneous voices that are different from each other are singing together. Vizehu ikar haneimut. And this creates the essential beauty of song. Umi shemishutat bayam hatamud yir'eh neimut mishunot mikol hakolot hamishonot zemizeh. And one who wanders in the sea of the Talmud will see the diverse beauty of all the diverse voices. In other words, our Jewish tradition is multivocal, like a song. And it is in that singing where each of our voices are important. Not just the rabbi's voice, but everybody who spoke and everybody who had things in their heart to say. Every one of us who participates is creating together that music, the expressing ourselves. The Torah is a song. And I think that is such a powerful and beautiful response to tragedy. I invite you to stand as I read some poems in memory, first of those who were victims of the terrorist attacks on 9/11. Creator of all, source and shelter, grant a perfect rest under your tabernacle of peace to those who died in the 9/11 attacks on the United States. Remember the works of their hands and the message of their hearts. Grant their families peace and comfort for your name's sake and for the sake of those who perished. Bring an end to violence, terror, speedily in our days. May their memories be sanctified with joy and love. May their souls be bound up in the bond of everlasting life, a living blessing in our midst. And a prayer for the first responders. God of the selfless, God of the strong and the brave, grant a perfect rest among the souls of the righteous to those who died in service to others because of the 9/11 attacks to the United States. May their dedication to protecting life serve as a shining lamp of love, and the works of their hands bring us all merit in heaven. Bless the souls of all those who have died to save others, civilians and professionals, the trained and the untrained, in every age and in every land. Men and women who answered the call of honor, duty, and service. May their memories be sanctified with joy and love. May their souls be bound up in the bond of everlasting life, a living blessing in our midst. And a prayer for those who survived. God of the survivor, God of the mourner and the witness, grant solace and peace to those still held by physical, emotional, and spiritual distress from the attacks of 9/11. Release them from visions of death and destruction, from guilt or shame, from fear or anger. Bind their wounds with your steadfast love. Lift them on your wings of kindness and grace. Blessed are those who have found peace. Blessed are those without tranquility. Blessed are those who speak. Blessed are those who stay silent. Blessed are those who have healed. Blessed are those who suffer. Blessed are those who forgive. Blessed are those who cannot forgive. Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, source of strength for survivors of violence and tragedy in every land and in every age. Blessed are you, Rock of Israel, source of hope and comfort. We continue now with the Musaf service, page 428. We begin with Chatzi Kaddish. A reminder not to forget the special additions for the Shabbat before Yom Kippur, which can be found interspersed throughout the Amidah.
Yitkadal v'yitkadash shmei Rabbah.
Amen.
Be'amad ivrakute v'yamlich malchute b'chayechon u'vyomechon u'chayei lechol beit Yisrael bagala u'bizman kariv v'yimeru amen. Yehi shmei Rabbah mevarach Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitba'ar v'yitramam v'yinaseh v'yitadar v'yitalev v'yitalal shmei dekudusha v'yichu leila micho birchata v'shirata tush birchata v'nechemata damiran ve'alma v'yimeru amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu v'Elohei Avotenu Elohei Avraham Elohei Yitzchak v'Elohei Yaakov Elohei Sarah v'Elohei Rivka Elohei Rachel v'Elohei Leah Ha'el Hagadol Hagibor v'Hanara El Elyon Gomel Chasadim Tovim v'Konei Hakol v'Zocher Chasdei Avot Umevi Goel Livnei B'neihem Leman Shemo Be'ahava Zochreinu L'chaim Melech Hafetz B'chaim L'chotveinu B'sefer HaChaim L'mancha Elohim Echaim Melech Ozer Fukei Moshe U'Magen Baruch atah Adonai Magen Avraham Uvokei Tzara Atah Gibor Le'olam Adonai Mechayei Meitim Atarav L'Hoshia Mechakel Chaim B'Chesed Mechayei Meitim B'Rachamim Rabim Somech Noflim B'Rofeh Holim Umatir Asurim Umechayei Emnato Shenei Afar Michal Mochav Gevurot Umido Melach Melech Mimid Umechayeh Umatzmiach Yeshua Michal Mochav Avraham Zocher Tzura B'chaim Rachamim V'ne'eman atah l'chayo meitim Baruch atah Adonai Mechayei HaMeitim Naritzcha v'nagdishcha kesod siach sarfei kodesh hamagdishim shimcha ba'kodesh kakatuv al yad neviyecha v'kara zel zeh ve'yamar Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh Adonai Tzevot melech haaretz kevodo Kevodo malei olam mishartav sholim zeh lazeh Aye mikam kevodo Lumatam Baruch Yomeru
Baruch Kivod Adonai Nimkamo
Nimkamo Yufein Brachamim V'achonam Hamachadim Shemo Erev Bavoker B'chol Yom Tamid Pa'amayim Be'ahava Shema Omrim
Shema Yisrael Adonai
Yoshienu, Vehu Yashmienu Berachamav, Sheni V'yene Kol Chai, Vehu Yashmienu Berachamav, Sheni V'yene Kol Chai. Liot Lachem Elohim, Ani Adonai Elohim. V'divrei kodecha katuv lemor. L'dor v'ador nagid godlecha u'anetzach netachim kedushatcha nakdish v'shishatcha Eloheinu mipinu lo yamush le'olam ba'ed ki hamelech gadol v'kadosh atah baruch atah Adonai hamelech hakadosh.
If you haven't completed your individual whispered Amidah, please continue davening. We continue with Kaddish Shalem, page 506.
Yitkadal v'yitkadal shemei Rabbah.
Amen.
Be'amad yivrach yerutei v'yamlich malchutei b'chayachonu v'yimechonu v'chayidachol be'Yisrael ba'agalav v'zman kari v'yimeru.
Amen.
Yehesh shmei Rabbah mevorach. Le'olam le'olam yitbarach. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yipa'ar v'yitrabam v'yitnaseh v'yitadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal shmei nekudesha.
Brichu.
Le'ela le'ela mikol min kol v'rchata v'shirata tushbachata v'nechemata damiran be'ama v'yimeru.
Amen.
Titkabal tzojahonu v'mehon d'chol Yisrael k'adama v'hon v'yishma v'yimeru. Yehi shalom rabba min shemayel chayim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'yimeru.
Amen.
Oseh shalom imrama v'yaseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'yimeru.
Amen. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Welcome to Congregation Agudat Achim's in-person and live stream Shabbat morning service. I'm Rabbi Rafi Spitzer. Yes, this is Ellie and Jonah. Ellie always wants me to introduce her too. A Yasher Koach to Eli Moses for leading us in Musaf, to Gila Moses for chanting the Haftarah, to Dan Mayer for chanting the Torah, and to Steve Schmidt for leading us in Shachrit. A Yasher Koach to everybody who participated in the service, and thank you to those who shared and those who didn't share in our memorial for 9/11 this morning. The congregation celebrates the birthdays of David Gross, Meredith Geiter, Caitlin Spector, Manny Goldstein, Katerina Gross, Laura Mushkat, Dan Mayer, Jen Gavins, Sadie Weiss, and Eli Wool. And the anniversaries of Robert and Monica Wool, Larry and Michelle Kahn, Adam and Emily Gilman, Jeffrey and Lisa Shapiro, and Samuel and Esty Silvetsky. If you have other special occasions that you would like announced on the Bima or for us to celebrate with you, we would love to walk with you through your life at every joyous and solemn occasion, because that's what communities do for each other. We conclude our service now with Aleinu, page 510.
Aleinu l'shabeach l'adon hakol l'tekedu l'yotzer breshit shelo samanu ve'aratzo ve'lo samanu k'mishpachot ha'adama shelo sam chalkeinu kahem ve'gor aleinu kechol ha'mama v'anahu korim u'mishtachavim u'modim Lifnei Melech Malchei HaMelachim HaKadosh Baruch Hu Shehu Notei Shamayim Ve'osei Haaretz Umoshav Yikaro B'Shamayim Imal Ushkina Tuzo Begovei Meromim Hu Eloheinu Einod Emet Malkeinu Efezulato Kakatu B'Torato V'Adatayom V'Ashivota Elevavecha Ki Adonai Hu Elohim B'Shamayim Imam Ve'al Haaretz Mitachat Einod Kakatu b'Toratecha Adonayim le'olam va'ed v'nemar v'haya Adonai melech al kol ha'aretz Adonai echad U'shemo echad. Congregation honors the memories of the following individuals who have gone to their eternal rest: Suzanne Friedman, Alfred Goodman, Yosef Chliapov, Evelyn Olin, Anna Szenzensky, Louis Kosloff, Ida Silver, Frederick Vinnick, Raphael Siegel, Bernard Stein, Joel Kayan, Bessie Sobel, Irving Wasserman, Herman Bragan, Sam Ocean, Harris Sanders, Max Anixtein, Harry Lloyd Frisch,
Lillian Miller, Trudy Moses, Alan Rowan, David Sensor, Jean Wool, Charlotte Carpenter, Ruth Eisenberg, and Lillian Schaller. In solemn testimony to the unbroken chain of faith which links one generation of the house of Israel to the next, those who mourn and those who are observing Yartzeit now rise to magnify and sanctify God's name with the words of Kaddish Avelim, Mourner's Kaddish, page 512. Yitzgadal, Yitzkadash, Shemei Rabbah, Ve'alma Divra Kirutei, Ve'amlich Malchutei, Chayechon Uv'yomechon Uv'chayei Dechol Beit Yisrael, Ba'agalau V'zman Kariv Imru Amen. Yeh Shmei Rabbah Mevarach Le'alam Lamei Almaya. Yiparach V'yishtabach V'yitpa'ar V'yitromam V'yitnaseh V'yitadar V'yitaleh V'yitalal Shmei Dekudesha Brichu. Leila, Leila, Min Kol Birchata V'shirata Tushbechata V'nechamata Damiran Be'alma V'imru Amen. Yehei Shlama Rabbah Min Shemaya V'chayim Aleinu Ve'al Kol Yisrael V'imru Amen. Oseh Shalom Mimromav Hu Yaseh Shalom Aleinu Ve'al Kol Yisrael V'imru Amen. Steve's going to offer some announcements on behalf of the Board of Trustees.
Good Shabbos to those who are joining us on live stream today. Havdalah at 7:54 this evening. Sunday is a whole bunch of things. It's the opening day of the religious school. That opening day is going to end with a picnic, a Tashlik and Kaporet service at Blacknick Park for the religious school families. That'll be, this says 11:45, which I think is right. Outside of the Hebrew school at 9:45, we will be holding our Kever Avot memorial service at the cemetery. And at 11 o'clock, JNF is holding a 9/11 memorial service. Encourage people to attend those. Monday, the 13th, is the last day to register for the Steve Burke Lecture Series. Because the holidays are early this year, the Steve Burke Lecture Series will all be on Thursdays. We don't have to dance around the holiday schedule like we sometimes do. Details in the announcements. Other things to add, Wednesday night, of course, is Yom Kippur, Erev, and then the day of is Thursday. There's many details of the services available. One thing I want to quickly highlight is that on Thursday at 4:15, we're going to do something we haven't done for a while, which is to gather together and study the book of Jonah. This is put on by the Men's Club Torah Study Group. Encourage people to be here at 4:15 to join us for that, followed by the 5:15 service of Mincha Ne'ilah. Sunday, the 19th of September, so not tomorrow, but a week from, we will build the synagogue sukkah. Speaking of brokenness and destruction, we're going to rebuild the synagogue sukkah. So there's some nice symbolism of that. A couple of ongoing things. We are collecting food for the High Holiday Food Collection Drive for Schenectady Community Ministries. Would like to encourage everybody to participate in that. And we are looking for Carrot Festival volunteers for Carrot Festival on October 10th. In fact, we had a meta problem. We are looking for the volunteer coordinator to look for the volunteers. We also need someone to be the vendor captain. Anybody who would be willing to take on those tasks would be deeply appreciated, and you can do that by contacting Hillary Fink. Good Shabbos, Shana Tova. Looking forward to seeing you all this week and at many future services.
Yashkov, thank you, Steve. Just one last thing about Kol Nidre on this coming Wednesday, which is our wonderful cellist will be here playing as you arrive. He's going to be here at 6, and he's going to start playing at about 6:05. We are planning to start Kol Nidre at 6:15 because Kol Nidre has to be done before the holiday comes in at 6:46. And then we will continue, of course, with the rest of the Mariv service once the holiday comes in. But so do try to arrive between 6:05 and 6:15 while the cellist is playing during that time. That's the right time to arrive. We will begin at precisely 6:15. We conclude our service with Adon Olam, page 514.
Adon Olam asher malach b'terem kol yetzir nivrach v'ein asa v'epso kol azai melech shemo nikra azai melech shemo nikra ve'acharei kidlot hakol levado yimloch nora vehu aya vehu oveh vehu yeh betifara vehu yeh betifara vehu echad ve'en sheni v'ham shilo leach bira v'li reshit v'li tachlit v'lo haos v'ham nisra v'lo haos v'ham nisra v'hu eli v'chai gwali v'tzor chavli v'etzara v'hu nisi umanosli v'nakosi v'yom ekra v'nakosi v'yom ekra v'yado afkid ruchi v'yedishan v'yayira v'im ruchi keviyati Adonai li v'lo ira Adonai li v'lo ira.
Shabbat Shalom. Shana Tova. Yashika.